Hello, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm your host, Joanna LaFleur, and you're watching the YouTube version of the podcast. Week after week, we're coming at you with conversations with creatives and communicators all about how to communicate the best news in the world, but in the digital age. Thanks so much for watching, checking out this episode. If you want to know more, you want to check out more of our free resources, go to wordmadedigital.com or browse around this YouTube channel and you're definitely going to find some content that will help you. And of course, thank you so much to our sponsors, Compassion Canada and Wycliffe College are making this podcast possible. Enjoy the interview. Ruth Mullen, welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we go too far, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Introduce yourself in the context of your work.
Sure. So I am an instructional designer with an e-learning management platform. So I work with subject matter experts, a lot of professors and grain technicians, and I help them move their content onto our e-learning platform. So that's what I do during the day. I've also worked or volunteered with Faith Tech, and that's a global movement. And so I ran Faith Tech Toronto for a few years, also ran their labs for a little bit. And now I work or volunteer with them more on a speaker capacity. That's how I spend my time.
I mean, yeah. So you have a job and then you have a second job.
Kind of, yes.
And when we were talking about doing this podcast together, I love just even that you're a woman in tech. I spent some time in the formal tech industry. If people know my own story, I started my work in Waterloo in tech companies. That's where I studied and got right into tech marketing and all that stuff. So we're kind of nerdy in the same kind of nerdy way, but there aren't as many women as men in the conversation. So, but tell me what's going on with Faith Tech. Let's start there, and then we're going to move into social media. Tell us about Faith Tech, how it started, what it does, what's exciting right now.
Sure. So Faith Tech is a global movement that was founded by James Kelly here in Waterloo. And so it came out of the question in the midst of devastation, what can innovation happen? And so from that question, James started to bring together tech leaders and church leaders and say, look, what needs to happen? How can we partner these two and really bring innovation out of devastation? Because you look around and this was all before COVID, but we could see it and the stress in the world. And so it started out of that, and then it grew into Waterloo had a city, and then people in Toronto started asking for it and saying, what can we do? How can we make this happen? And then now it's in 10 cities. They're looking to double that in the next year or so. And then what's really exciting is that since COVID, the global organization's really built out. So we do calls once a quarter, just this year.
2020.
Yes. Wow. So there's always been people interested, and they say, hey, what's happening in Kuala Lumpur? And then we're like, nothing. So, but now with the global movement, they can jump into these calls. And so we're having, we did one call and there's 100 people on it. And in the faith and technology space. And I looked around the Zoom call and I was like, these are the people who've written the books that I've loved. And we're all in the same call. And it was just such a cool moment of these are the people who are thinking about theology and technology. And they're in the same room talking and helping and spurring each other on. And then one thing they did right at the beginning of COVID was a hackathon, a global hack. And they had 600 people participate in the 660, not 50.
Yeah, this is such a cool story. If people haven't heard about Faith Tech, this is like a beautiful illustration of what Faith Tech, the power of people using tech for good can do.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting because I was hoping you would tell this story.
Oh, perfect. So they did this hackathon. There were 660 people. I think 60 projects, and I think also 40 to 60 countries. And for a week, they just broke into projects and built these out for a week to 10 days. And the winning project was called Sound of Your Love, and it's got a website, soundofyourlove.com. And what they did was, in response to COVID, the problem that they were solving was one of the participants, her grandfather had just passed away. And he didn't die because of COVID, but he was dying during COVID. And because of that, no one was able to be with him. And so she was like, how can we prevent people from dying alone? And so they created this app that you can create an account and for a loved one, and then you give the phone number to friends and family, and they can call in, leave voice messages of like a song or a prayer or just an encouraging note. And then that is given as a phone or even just someone's phone. They can call that number and it can just play for the patient. And so the nurse doesn't have to sit there and hold the phone for them. It doesn't rely on another person. It just is regular feed to the person who's waiting there on a ventilator or whatever. And it allows them to hear voices of their loved one or voice messages of reconciliation. And so they won. The team was from, I think, 4 different time zones. And then they've been trialing.
And did they know each other before? Because, I mean, for people who aren't in this world, like the idea of a hackathon, I'm not I've worked in tech, but on the marketing side, I'm not a coder.
Same.
I don't think, are you
no,
a coder?
Not a coder.
So like a hackathon doesn't just mean people who can do like internet languages.
No.
Like all kinds of things coming together.
People
that have never. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the leaders was a nurse on this team. And so they've been trialing it. So yeah, they didn't know each other. You need people who can design it. You need the image side, you need the language side, you need the code side. And so they built it together as a team, and it's being trialed in Boston and also in Ontario and different places. I don't remember all the up-to-date stats, but it's been taking off, and I'm so excited that is a perfect example of like God can use creativity, use technology, pull it together, and still show his love in a way that answers problems.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and just the power of people being able to do that and offer their skills, their gifts, their talents in a way that, transforms people, but it's outside of their work. There's something really rewarding about using our skill set separately. Even in church world, I remember working as a pastor and people coming and saying like, I could use my skill as a photographer to serve the church, or like I could use my skill as a web builder or doing analytics, or I don't know, all this stuff. Like you mean like the church might want that? Because I thought my only options were, working in the nursery or shaking hands as an
tithing.
Usher kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that for people to realize, I mean, for some that's obvious, but for a lot of people it isn't, that like the skill set you have is so valuable for kingdom work, for expanding goodness in the world.
And the story James tells regularly is that one of the creators of the iPad, he happened to meet him. He's a Christian, and he was talking with James, and James said, this is our founder of Faith Tech. And he said, so what do you do at church? And he's like, well, I push PowerPoint. And he was like, what? And he was like, what could you design? And he just said like this interface that connects all these missionaries together and everything. And the guy looks up in the sky and he's like, yeah, probably. And he's like, well, why haven't you? And he's like, no one's asked. Like, I didn't know that they needed to do that. They needed that. And so he's just pushing PowerPoint because, it's the director of the guy who created the iPad is the same one, but also someone who's part of BBM, building BlackBerry text messaging. He's pushing PowerPoint because he might not be now, but the church wasn't harnessing that knowledge and experience.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? Why does the church have all this wealth in the pews, metaphorically? No one's in a pew these days.
Yeah.
But why is it that we're not using these people? Or what do you think the disconnect is there?
I think part of it is leadership just doesn't know. Like, we've done church in one way for so long that we don't know what to do with a coder. And so a lot of these events with Faith Tech, it's really fun because you get pastors, and the crowd is people over 60 and then a bunch of people under 40. And then like obviously the blend in the middle, but it's pastors listening and being like, oh, this is possible. And a lot of times it's very scary, and they don't necessarily know how to think in the coding world and the tech space. And I mean, I think that's shifting very quickly, but I think a lot of it's people just pastors aren't saying, here's my problem. I didn't even know a tech person could solve that. And tech people just don't think they're needed because no one's saying anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's yeah, they don't even know what to ask. It's
Mhm.
like both sides, they're speaking such different languages. They don't even know sometimes. And so is that what part of what Faith Tech is about, bridging between these
Yes.
two languages, the language of the pastor or the ministry missions the missions organization and these techie nerds.
Yeah, part of it. So, I mean, from a lab perspective, we'll take partnerships with different organizations. We worked with Missions Aviation Fellowship, and we go to them and say, "Hey, what problems do you have right now? Let's build a team to help build that." So we have 11 or 12 different labs happening right now globally, where we're building with different organizations. But then also as speakers, our job, what we see is we're taking like I'm typically don't speak to coders because I don't understand code, but I can talk to the pastors and the individual users of social media and say, hey, here's a way that we can look at this and bridge the gap. And so each of like on our leadership team, the speakers, we all have different focuses and areas of expertise that is really bridging the gap for the Christians in the room to say, okay, how can I like take what used to be separate and start to bend them towards each other?
Yeah. Now, and this speaking of like these two worlds or the way we've always done church, obviously 2020 has sped up
Yes.
what was inevitably coming, I think, to do with technology and church and digital offerings from churches to the community. It's sped it up in some cases. I would say for some churches, they're like 10 years of red tape they might have gone through, and all of a sudden it was just gone. To
Yeah.
join, what is possible in the technology we have. But look ahead, like help us. What are you seeing as? And I'm not saying you have to be a futurist expert, but what's in the waters right now that people are excited about from a tech perspective that you think from a faith or ministry opportunity that you think people should get excited or people should be more curious about these kind of things?
Yeah, good question. And this is not my expertise. But I think I know one of the guys on our team talked about like church needs to be more than Zoom. And like we
Mm.
as a church need to figure out how to connect in ways that's more than just watching a service. And that like there's studies that millennials are just checking out. And I get it. It's a real struggle to attend church right now. And so looking at how can we be a create content in a way that people can digest and use and move forward with, but then also build community in a way that's genuine and vulnerable. And I don't know the answer yet. We just used a cool platform this week called AirMeet, which was really fun. And it actually puts you in tables to meet with people. And then there's like a presentation moment, and then you choose a table and you have a round table chat. So there's,
So it's sort of a video
yes,
conferencing.
yeah,
So it's not just like a Zoom, where Zoom you can do breakouts.
correct.
It's something a bit more evolved than that.
Yeah, and so that you can turn into a presentation mode and everyone's camera goes off, or you shut that down and people go into the lobby and choose a table and they can see other people at the table and start a conversation and jump out whenever they want to. In Zoom, you're
Whoa.
stuck. Yeah. So there's some cool things happening. It's just, I think as
Yeah.
church, we need to be more creative and keep leaning to where the problem points are. And I think they're smaller. Like it's just socializing. What does that look like now? And zeroing in on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this is the point then to transition to the conversation. You just wrote an article recently about social media and some problems or concerns people are having. Specifically, maybe it's this response to a Netflix documentary a lot of people have been watching about
Yeah.
the evils of social media. Let's dive into that because I think for me, when people were talking about this Netflix documentary, I was realizing, because again, it's just more of my world, it's more of the world that you come from, that people didn't know some of this stuff. Like this idea of like, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. As in, if Facebook or Instagram doesn't cost you money as a user, then they have to make money somehow, and they're going to make money off of your eyeballs. And so I'm just saying that because to me that felt quite obvious. But then I realized it wasn't obvious to a lot of people. They just had never thought about it. They're not stupid people. They're just people who don't have to think about this as much as maybe you or I have had to think about it. So, talk to me about this. What's going on here with this idea of how these companies make money off of us? How are we the product for these companies? For people who haven't seen this Netflix documentary.
Yeah, so I mean, it's called Social Dilemma, and I'm gonna not do a great job of explaining it, so please watch
That's
it.
fine.
But I think really when when they created this, it was a networking spot. And then one of the people in the documentary he was the person in charge of financing, figuring out how to make this to monetize Facebook. And they decided that the more time you could spend on Facebook, they could post ads, which then caught your attention. And that's how they sell, is the impressions an ad can make for people. So their job as social media is to keep you as focused and keep your attention for as long as possible, because then they can say, hey, we on average, this demographic looks at their screen this much, this is how much we can charge you for an ad. And so on the back end, that's how they've had to restructure social media in order for them to make money at our expense.
Yeah.
And so if we're not aware, we can get sucked in real close.
Yeah, it's this what they call the attention economy. Literally making money is made off of attention. So the longer we spend, the more we click on things, the more we comment on things. Even currently the algorithms change sometimes, but on Instagram, they don't just want to see you commenting on things, they want to see you bookmarking things and sending to share images or content with friends. Because that's ensuring you're going to go back later to look at it, or you're sending it to a friend who also has to then open their app and spend some time on the app to send it. Again, we just want you to spend more time and get other people through you to spend more time on these apps.
And another, at the same time as watching this, I also listened to The Rabbit Hole by New York Times. And so they talk about this happening in YouTube, and how those recommended lists is just one more way to get your attention, to say, okay, one more thing that's just like this, that's based off your search and your viewing history, that they just keep you going. But then you end up in this tunnel of like-minded, like an echo chamber of thought. And so that can be really detrimental, but fascinating podcast to listen to.
Well, I mean, it never happens to me. I mean, I go on YouTube and I just watch one video and then I shut it down and I put my phone down and I have a quiet evening at home.
Looking at the fireplace. Yes. Never once have we ever gotten stuck in YouTube.
Oh man, no, I mean, you're right. It's so addicting, but what we're discovering through things like this, I think people are becoming aware it's designed to make you addicted.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what's the problem with this addiction? What are we seeing? What's happening? Okay, so we're addicted. Okay, so we use our phones a lot. Does it matter? Yes,
it does. And I mean, I found the documentary kind of reassuring, because it was backing up the research I had been doing because I've been teaching on this for a year. And like you said, I think people know but don't really know. So there was a lot of shock when I would say some of these statistics. But they went deep into suicide rates are increasing significantly, sometimes doubling for preteen girls and teenagers. Depression rates are skyrocketing, especially for people born after 1996, I believe. The millennial generation are the Gen Zs after 96, they're the first generation to be raised with constant access to the internet and phones. And we're seeing skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression. And these guys, I started to look around, and these guys are graduating university right now. Some of them are getting married. Some of them are having kids. And I remember when I graduated university and Facebook had only been around 5-ish years. And I was dealing with so much fear of missing out and feeling like I was in the wrong path, because my friends were doing one thing and I was choosing a different life direction. And that was without the predisposed anxiety and stress from growing up on social media. So we're dealing with it, but that generation for sure is in the middle of a big upheaval right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, again, it's people who are smarter than me have educated me on recently, is that for any meaningful social study or psychological study, it takes 10 years. And so when the iPhone came out in 2007, 2008, It was right when I was finishing university, my undergrad, and I didn't get one because I couldn't. I was a poor student. I couldn't afford one, but I wanted one. Obviously, everybody wanted one. But I was with BlackBerry at the time, and it was cool too. At the time, BlackBerry was still cool, but all to say that from it took them really from that rise of the iPhone until now. It's been now a little over 10 years that the world has become, enamored with these little glass screens in our hands, that now they're only just getting the early results of what has been happening for 10 years, because it takes, I guess, people who are smarter say it just takes that long to get any meaningful data of patterns and trends. And so now, as you say, we're seeing this like anxiety, depression, even some stuff around other forms of addiction, beyond just screen addiction, but addictions that couple with that, like pornography and sex
Yeah,
addictions and
absolutely.
spending addiction, gaming addiction.
And they talked on the documentary. They talked about Snapchat dystopia, or it's a different word. I've got the word wrong, but girls are asking for plastic surgery that will make them look like their Snapchat filters. And I was just like, this is like it's distorting our understanding of what beauty is and being okay with ourselves.
How do you feel like that? If you want to get a little more personal, like we all live in this world of filters. How do you wrestle with that as a woman? I mean, as just a human, in the filter era. Like we were teasing before we started this, we were messaging back and forth, and you're like, is this going to be video or just audio? Like, because at some level, like our appearance matters. We don't want to look like a crazy person out in the world. But it can go far beyond that. How's that been for you as a person walking through that?
Good question. I think I mostly post without selfies. Like I just feel weird posting selfies. And I just saw somewhere, I don't remember where it was a selfie right next to a portrait, and showed how different the person looks as a result of the screen, like the camera angle, or the camera type. And just since then I've been like, oh, I don't know how I feel about selfies anymore. So I'll take selfies when I'm on vacation, but I try and make it look like it's not a selfie. And then, but I never got into the filter, and I don't think I've done it yet. So I'm a little bit old school in that way. Like I haven't done the Snapchat filters.
You're a purist.
And so I haven't, but maybe that's speaking to other insecurities where I'm just not wanting to put my image out there because I don't feel like I've dressed up enough.
Yeah, I get it though. I mean, there's this pressure the other way too. I feel reluctant to have images of new pictures of myself on the internet, but recognize the tension of that in my work, that people are wanting to connect with me. So they want to see a picture of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am reluctant to post them, or I feel stupid every time I do.
Yeah, I know. It's a real wrestle. Like, what is this?
I like myself, but yeah, I know. I get it.
What personal, like, do they now think I'm the selfie persona person versus like a genuine human?
Yeah. Okay, so last summer you had you did like a social media experiment, or you challenged yourself in your own social media use. I'd love, tell us why, tell us what happened, and then I want to talk about, practically what did you do, and then I want to see like what were your insights or what did you learn?
Yeah, sure. So I did it shortly after I saw you, because I had started teaching on social media, not thinking I had a problem, just like I was aware social media was a problem. And then I realized, I'm like, Ruth, you really should actually test this just because you're teaching on it, and like have some integrity. And so I deleted Facebook because I knew I had a browser. So by delete, I mean I took the app off my phone. I never deleted my account fully. So I took the app off my phone and I was like, hey, Instagram. And then I just was like full of fear. And so for 3 weeks, I couldn't delete Instagram. And I think it was because I knew I could access Facebook on my computer, so I wouldn't be fully cut off. But Instagram, I didn't know of the browser experience yet, so I thought that
and it's gotten better too. Like it wasn't. At least you can like read your messages now.
Yes, sometimes, but it's still glitchy. But I think I appreciate its glitchiness, as horrible as it is. But yeah, I didn't. So I thought if I deleted Instagram, my community had shifted to more Instagram. I had just moved physically. So I was really nervous that I was going to isolate myself by deleting it all. And then I think I have a friend who he'd old schooled his phone hardcore, and he's 22. And I was like, what? If this 22-year-old can do it, I can do it. And so I eventually deleted it. And then I figured out I could do the browser. So I still had access, but I let myself only check 3 times a day for, I think, a month. And just started to notice, like,
you had did you set an alarm? How did you do that? Or did you put something in the app that had a rule of how long you could be in it? Or
yes, I have had that rule. So my screen time rule is on there. I think it's an hour, or it's 30 minutes, but I've done it where my screen time's a minute. And so it was just like in and then out. And, so I play around with those different settings. I think at that time, it was just the Ruth, for the integrity of the experiment, you must do it this way. So it seemed to work, but I do still struggle with, but I still struggle with overriding my rules all the time. So I did that for about a month, and then looked at like how Instagram was different. Like not as much content came up. I didn't get as many ads. I realized that the more I check my phone, the more it has to give me something to look at. So if you've posted 5 pictures, if I go and check in 3 hours, if nothing else has happened, then I'm going to see the second picture in your post. And then I might see an ad as well. But it was weird because when I check my phone more often, it looks like more is happening. But when I don't check my phone very often, nothing's happening. And so I was like, you're playing games on me.
But they have to show you new content. And so even if you whittle down your following list to a small group, every time you go on, it needs to show you new stuff to keep you interested.
Yeah. I got bored, actually. The less I checked it, I was more bored on Instagram the more I check it. As weird as that sounds.
Yeah. And as you say, using the glitchy Instagram on your browser was a bad experience, which helps you leave.
Yes. So one of my solutions is I on and off delete Instagram from my phone now and use the browser experience, because it's such an irritating experience that I don't want to be on it. So I do it on purpose, and it drives me nuts. But that makes me spend less time on it.
Yeah. So tell me, like, what have you been learning then? You did this experiment. Obviously, you're back. I just spoke to you. We just messaged DM back and forth today on Instagram. That's how we talked about this video. We were talking about what to look like on video. So you are back. What have you learned? How has your relationship changed to these tools?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I learned was that God uses technology, and not in the broad, like, of course he can use technology, but God in the Bible used technology. And I remember in the middle of that, like I had it big whiteboards all over my wall, and I was like, God, like I can see the problem. I can see how bad this is, but how do I talk to you about this? Because you're like, the Bible doesn't say anything about internet and Facebook. And I read the book From the Garden to the City by John Dyer, which was so incredibly helpful. Just the theology of technology.
Sorry, say the name again of the book.
Yeah, From the Garden to the City by John Dyer.
From the Garden to the City.
Dyer. And he goes through, like, from creation to now, basically how technology's evolved, and I didn't realize, like, language is a form of technology. And so Jesus coded the world by using God coded the world by using his language to create it. That's coding. And then you look at the 10 Commandments. I used Jesus, but God had placed the Israelites in the middle of a communications revelation. No, what's the word?
Revolution?
Yeah.
Revolution.
Where the language, they were building alphabet, and they'd been going from pictograms to actually creating cuneiform and language. And then when God used that new language to write out the 10 Commandments, that was like cutting edge technology. And so he'd been using it the whole way through. And so that changed my whole outlook on the process. And then in the book, I started to realize that every tool has a value set. And so when I use Instagram, I'm choosing to align myself to creative expression, values in likes and DMs, and then story views. Like I put value in that. And so if if I use my Google Maps, I'm putting value on not creatively thinking about where, or critically thinking about where I'm going. I'm following what the app tells me. And that, I think, was a very important, because I was like, these are handles, I can do something with that. Because then I decide what values do I want to live by. And then I choose what values I live by versus just aligning to Instagram's values that they want me to live by.
Now, in an article you wrote recently about this, when you're asking this question, I don't know if you know them off the top of your head, but you asked, what values do I want to live by? And then you had a few questions that you were asking yourself. And I would love just, as we come to closer to the end of the conversation, for you to help give that to people so that they might have a filter to manage or consider their own tech use.
Yeah.
Because as you've just said, they're not just tools, they're value systems. And so therefore, they're not actually neutral. They could be used for good or could be used for bad. They come with a presupposed value system and a view of the world that you're invited into. Facebook, Instagram, Google Maps, it's a value system. So what are some questions that people can ask themselves to consider their use of these tools
and
values?
Yeah. So first question is like, who do you want to be? And figuring that out separate from technology. And the Bible has a bunch of values, like God's values presence and he values dependence. And what does that look like in relation to social media? So that's a whole other thing. But who do you want to be? How do you want people to describe you if you were to pass away? Like, that's morbid, but it's an important thought to define you now. And then from there you say, okay, what's my behavior when I use this? So I've used this with apps. I use this with books. I use this with other tools, like, I don't even Harvey's, really, like fast food. But like, what's my behavior?
That's a Canadian shout out, Harvey's.
Yeah.
That's a Canadian burger place.
A very delicious burger place. So then I say, okay, is my behavior making me more like my values, or becoming, and if my values to be more Christ-like, am I becoming more Christ-like as a result of using Instagram? Or is it pulling me and making me more independent and not reliant on God? And so, or you can, like, to non-Christianize it, it's like, is this making me more into the person I want to be or less? And so when you ask those questions, then you say, okay, well, what problem was this app designed to solve? Because I think at the heart of it, social media was designed to create a networking experience and community. And there's, like, the statistics are showing us that the use of Instagram and messaging is up 60% in COVID. Twitter use was up, I think, 50%, 60%. And this was done like in April, beginning of COVID. They were digging into this. And so we need this community. But then the last question is, how can I use it in a way that is aligning to my values? I can still get the benefit of what I need from it without having to just do it their way.
Big questions, existential questions. And I hope that that people listening start to ask them. I know more and more in my own life, I'm asking them. I think I feel the addiction myself. And now I'm sort of saying, okay, so if this isn't how I want to spend my days and therefore how I want to spend my life, how do I get out of this? And I think, when you talk about, we started a conversation on faith tech and opportunities for tech in church. I'm really curious to see what the church could do to serve the world in this issue. How to, like AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, it comes out of a Christian heritage of, you literally have to acknowledge a higher power, acknowledge God. You have to go through forgiveness and reconciliation with people. But all to say, it was a guy who had a problem himself and needed help fixing it and needed a community to do it in. And I'm hopeful that the church could also serve the world in this way to help with this crazy addiction we all have, and we need help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we often get at Faith Tech, they say, oh, well, let's just create a Christian faith Facebook. And I just want to say that I don't think that's the answer, because God wants us to be in the world and not of it. And who's to say that the problems of Facebook don't just become the problems of a new app? Like in the documentary, they say, we designed the like button to bring more love and positivity, not to create depression. Like, we didn't see that happening. But I think it's important for us to, as believers, to be really mindful, because as an app develops or something develops, there's the intention of the designer, there's the algorithm of the app and how it's learning and growing and how it's used. And then there's the user. So all three of those are working together to create the app you're experiencing today. And so the only one you have control over is you, the user, and the algorithm's constantly learning. And in some ways, the design of it, the designer's original purpose, doesn't matter anymore because the algorithm has its own life and we are the users. And so we have to play into that. But yes, there's huge opportunity for us to teach like the spiritual discipline of using social media and what does that look like as Christians. But then also as the tech community, what can we do to help create, maybe there's a plugin that goes on top of it that just gives us their most important information, or things like screen time or ethical design in our actual development. There's so many angles we can take this.
And on that note, I want to have you back sometime, because perhaps in season 6, we'll have you back because I want to talk about instructional design.
Yes.
This is really your area of expertise, and the church has so much to learn from that expertise, I think, around. So just in a sentence, what even is instructional design? Give us a teaser about that, and we'll have you back another time to talk about it.
Yeah. So right now it's a bunch of really giant questions in my head with no answers. But this idea of, as educators, we believe, we know that the best way to help someone learn and bring them, like we want them to get to higher levels of thinking, and having them just repeat something back to you or understand something. Those are the lowest levels of thinking. We really want people, our learners, to focus on it, applying and evaluating and analysis. That's when we know they're starting to apply that. So how do we, as Christians, or when we're teaching something in the church, how are we building our content to then focus on this higher level thinking? And so, yeah, I need to do a lot more research on it. It's just a question that's spinning in my head, because what if a 40-minute lecture is not the answer? As an instructional designer, I never tell someone to write, like I say, 10 minutes or less. If you're giving me video content, it needs to be under 10 minutes. And the church is still doing lectures. And so I don't know what the answer is to that yet.
Well, and surprisingly, like, less people are showing up to hear them now.
I know. And yeah,
so maybe they aren't working.
Yeah, it's a big question I have.
Yeah. Ruth, that's a good little teaser. I think we need to pick at and do some problem solving around that whole. Let's come back, maybe in 6 months or a year's time and talk about that after you've done more of your own research and work on it. But thank you so much. If people want to find you or find Faith Tech, where do you want to send them today?
Faith Tech, just go to faithtech.com. You can find, there's some information about me. My Instagram, ironically, is @RU_Mullen. And so that's where I am working out my addiction to social media. And then, those are probably the two best places right now. And also the article, My Social Dilemma. Should I delete my Instagram
Yes, we'll
accounts?
link to that in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
So people can read. And I think actually it outlines a way that people can both try like a break from social media, but also during that break, not just take a break, but also bring you through some of the questions that you brought to us today about how to assess who we want to be, and therefore how we, what our values are, and then how to build that relationship to social media.
And
Ruth,
also,
thank you.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. I was just going to say the article also has like my strategies and things I've been curating as I've been talking to people. So there's a list of some possible ways to help with that. But yes, thanks for having me.
It's so good. I think you're smart and thoughtful. And so I just appreciate getting into your brain a little bit today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. This is fun.